This is Chapter 3, Lesson 4, Slope-Intercept Form. In a non-proportional linear relationship, the graph passes through the point 0, b, or the y-intercept. The blank of a line is the y-coordinate of the point where the line crosses the y-axis. In that blank, you're going to write y-intercept. Okay, so the y-intercept of a line is the y-coordinate of the point where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, so this is where the line crosses the y-axis. That's what the y-intercept is. Okay, it tells me where it crosses. So, slope-intercept form of a line. Okay, non-proportional linear relationships can be written in the form y equals mx plus b. This is called the blank form. This is the slope-intercept form. Okay. When an equation is written in this form, m is the slope. Okay, so we learned about slope in lesson 2. And b is the y-intercept. Remember, that's where it crosses the axis. Okay? So, complete the steps to derive the equation for a non-proportional linear relationship by using the slope formula. Okay. So in order to figure out what my slope is, I'm going to use y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay. And that equals m, my slope. So I'm going to look at my 2 points that they gave me, and they are very tiny, I'm sorry. So the first point they give me is 0, b, and the second point they give me is x, y. Okay? So I have y minus b over x minus 0 equals m. So y minus b over x. Okay? Now in order to get the y by itself, I multiply both sides by x. So y minus b becomes m times x. And then I add b to both sides. So I get mx plus b. Okay? So that's where I get my information from. So m is my slope. And b is my y-intercept. Sorry. M is my slope, b is my y-intercept. Okay. So let's look at a couple of examples. So the first one I have up here is state the slope and the y-intercept of the graph of the equation y equals 2/3 x minus 4. So realistically, I don't actually even need the graph. I can look at this and go back and look at my formula. Remember, y equals mx plus b. b is my slope. Well, my slope is right here. And my b value is right there at minus 4. Okay, so the slope of the graph is 2/3 and the y-intercept is -4 or minus 4. Okay. Next example, I want to write an equation of a line in slope-intercept form with a slope of -3 and a y-intercept of -4. So slope of -3, y-intercept of -4. Okay. So I take my y equals mx plus b formula and I just plug in what they give me. So I plug in -3 for my slope So I get y equals negative 3x, and then I plug in my b, which is minus 4, so my equation, y equals negative 3x minus 4. Okay. My last example is to write an equation in slope-intercept form for the graph shown. The y-intercept is 4. Okay, so here's my graph. Okay, so I can look at it. Okay, this is where it crosses, and that's at 4. So that's my y-intercept. Okay, so my y-intercept is 4. And then I can move down 1 and over 2. Okay, so I'm moving down 1 over 2 to get my slope. So my slope is negative 1/2 because I moved down 1 and to the right 2. So that's where I get my slope from. Okay, so slope is negative 1/2. So then I plug in my equation and I get y equals negative 1/2 x plus 4. Okay. So there are a couple try it problems on this page. Go ahead, pause the video, try them out, and when you're done, we will go over the answers together. All right, so now that you've tried the try it problem, let's go over the answers together. Okay, the first couple say state the slope and the y-intercept of the graph of each equation. So letter A, y equals negative 5x plus 3. Okay, so my slope, remember my equation, y equals mx plus 3 plus b. Okay, so my slope is negative 5 and my y-intercept is positive 3. Okay, letter B, y equals 1/4 x minus 6. So my slope is 1/4 and my y-intercept is negative 6. Remember to always take the sign that's right in front of the y-intercept. Okay. Letter C, y equals negative x plus 5. Okay, so there is no number in front of the x, so that means my slope is negative 1 because there's no number. And my y-intercept is 5. Okay. Letter D, y equals negative 2/3 x minus 2. So my slope is negative 2/3 and my y-intercept is minus 2. Letter E says write an equation in slope-intercept form for the graph shown. Okay, so if I look at my graph, I'm looking at where it crosses the y-axis. Okay, so if I look at this, it crosses at negative 2. So it crosses at negative 2. So that's my B, that's my y-intercept. Okay, and then in order to figure out the slope, I look at where it crosses the next point, which is right here. So it tells me to go up 2 over 1. So my slope is 2 over 1, or 2. So my formula is y equals 2x minus 2. Letter F says write an equation of a line in slope-intercept form with a slope of 3/4 and a y-intercept of negative 3. Okay, so I get y equals 3/4 x minus 3. Okay. So on page 63, this lesson continues. Here's an example of slope-intercept form. It's a little bit larger and easier to see. Gives you a couple more examples. Okay. So the other thing that I want to talk about is interpreting the y-intercept. Okay. So if I'm interpreting the y-intercept, it says, when an equation in slope-intercept form applies to a real-world situation, the slope represents the rate of change and the y-intercept represents the initial value. Okay. So the example they give me is student council is selling t-shirts during Spirit Week. It costs $20 for the design and $5 to print each shirt. The cost y to print x shirts is given by the equation y equals 5x plus 20. Graph y equals 5x plus 20 using the slope and y-intercept. Okay, so my y-intercept is 20, right? So I go to my graph and I look where 20 is. So I'm going to put a point there because that's my y-intercept. That's where I start. Okay. Then my slope is 5. So that tells me I go up 5 over 1. Up 5 over 1, up 5 over 1, and I can keep going, okay? So I can also interpret this meaning, okay? So the slope is 5. It represents the cost in dollars per t-shirt, okay? The y-intercept 20 is the one-time charge in dollars for the design. So there are 2 more try it problems on this page. Go ahead, pause the video, try them out, and when we come back, we'll go over the answers together. Now that you've tried the try it problems, let's go over the answers together. So it says, a taxi fare y can be determined by the equation y equals 0.50x plus 3.50, where x is the number of miles traveled. So G tells me to graph the equation and H tells me to interpret the slope and the y-intercept. Okay, so I'm going to come over here in my graph. Okay. So if my equation was y equals 0.50x plus 350, my y-intercept is 350, right? Okay, so I'm going to come over to my graph. Here's my y-intercept. 350 is right between 3 and 4, so I'm going to put a point there because that's my starting spot. Okay, so then this tells me that I go up 50 cents and over 1. Okay, so I go up 50 cents to 4, and I go over 1. Okay, and I go up 50 cents to 450, and over to 2, up to 5, over to 3. Okay, as you can see, I'm starting to form a line. Okay. So then you can take a straight edge, or you can do it free-handed and just connect the points, and it will continue on, right? So H asks me to interpret the slope and the y-intercept. So the slope, 0.50, represents the change per mile. So that's how much it costs to travel per mile. 350 is the flat rate that the taxi cab charges. And that is the end of lesson 4.